Hello, I'm Hywel. I'm from a company called Hywel, and yeah, I'm going to be talking about how you can obtain and train knowledge, skills, and wisdom into your teams. Um, I'm very passionate about this topic, I have to say. I care a lot about learning because it touches so many areas of my life. And I was thinking about all of them when I was writing this talk and came up with quite a long list of areas where I think learning has been really important to me. So obviously software development, something I started when I was 9 and keep doing and keep improving at, and I hope to be successful one day. But also learning to be a better technology leader. So as Joel mentioned, I ran CTO dinners for a few years before the pandemic started in this room in King's Cross Station. And really for me, that was about learning to be a better leader from other people. Um, I also host a podcast in conjunction with CTO Craft called Primarily Context Based. And that's really about the decisions that leaders have to make and the context we use to make those difficult decisions. And outside of work, I've also spent quite a lot of time in recent years learning about electronics and how CPUs are built and building my own 8-bit CPU from discrete components. I'm also a big fan of quizzes and quiz shows, and I like going on quizzes. That's one slightly unusual form of learning, but it is a form of learning nonetheless. And I played saxophone for a lot of my life, and I'm constantly, I hope, improving at that. And then I also like crafting and building things for myself, which includes things like knitting. I care enough about learning that I've started a company focused on learning. That's what Skill Aware is. And that's because I believe that good learning is worth spending time on. This talk contains one model, one table, and one gimmick, and I hope you will find that an acceptable ratio. And just quickly before I move on, and this is a map of Oman, whose capital city is Muscat. Anyway, I want to start the talk proper with a story about a team and a library. This was a company where I'd built the code base, and then I'd hired the teams to come in and take over ownership of it. And I'd leaned heavily on this library called CanCanCan. The details don't matter so much, except so that it's a Rails library, and it helps replace this common pattern where you write these CRUD controllers to creation, reading, updating, and deletion of objects. And those actions are pretty standard. You load some stuff in, you check the permissions, and then you do something with the resources that you loaded in. And the joy of CanCanCan is that it replaces all of this code with this much shorter piece of code, which is therefore simpler, easier to maintain, and easier to work with, in general. And of course, this being a description of a library making things simpler, of course, it also fixes the intentional hidden bug where the original code forgot to do any permissions checking on one of its actions, which CanCanCan definitely would do for you. Now, CanCanCan has hidden depths and difficulties. I knew that because I'd learned it the hard way, taking over an existing project that used it. And so I'd hit all of the problems that it hides pretty early on. And I wanted my teams to be quickly comfortable and competent with using it. And so I decided to do some training. I made a load of slides. I covered the whole API of the library. I broke it down. I showed use cases like this one on the screen. I showed before and after sample code. I talked about the gotchas of the library and the ways it could surprise you. I talked about the shortcomings and the things it couldn't do and how you could work around those. And I talked about how to debug it. And that took days of my time to write. And then I delivered it. I delivered it in small groups. I gave lots of opportunity for people to ask questions, and I asked them questions along the way to make sure that they'd understood what they'd heard. And that took hours as well. And then I finished, and I thought, fantastic. Now everyone is going to be great at CanCanCan, and I'm no longer the bottleneck for this team. And then the next day, one of the teams said, great, I'm working on this new controller using CanCanCan, and I know you know how to use it. Can you do it for me? And of course, I realized that I had failed because my desired outcome had been that the team could use the library for themselves. They would have this new ability, this new capacity to do something that they couldn't previously. And the actual outcome I got was that the team knew to ask me for help. I had established myself as the team's expert rather than passing on some kind of ability to them. And this, I think, illustrates a larger point, which might not be a surprise to you, which is that training can fail. I'm a member of at least 10 different online communities of tech leaders, and I see regular comments where people say, I tried this training and it didn't work for my team. What training has worked for you and can I use it? I think we're used to training failing. I think we're used to accepting failure as a possible outcome of training. And this talk is an attempt to answer the question of why that is and how to avoid it. This photo, by the way, is a picture of the modern district of Muscat, which is the capital city in Oman. Anyway, I spent 6 months thinking about this problem, reading and researching about learning and training. And what I discovered is that there's lots of discussion and literature about the different modes of training, training that's passive, active, constructive, interactive. There's lots of discussion and literature about the different outcomes of training, whether it's recall or recognition of information, or whether it's the ability to evaluate and analyze and create with new ideas. There's discussion and literature about different kinds of learning, different kinds of learner, sorry, and what makes people learn better. But surprisingly, there is not much discussion about the different forms of learning. And that led me to believe that there was this missing model. I thought hard about the learning I've seen, that I've experienced and that I've given, what's been effective and what hasn't, and developed a new model that helped me, at least to myself, explain that difference. And that model is knowledge, skills, and wisdom. So on the one hand, knowledge is really data, facts, information. It's the kind of learning that's very useful for quizzes. Above that is skills. Skills are things like know-how, its abilities, its capabilities to do something. So I would include in skills things like knitting and electronics and playing the saxophone. And a layer above that is wisdom. It's about contextual judgment and good decision making. And of course, these build on each other. Skills rely on knowledge, and wisdom gets used when applying skills. If I'm playing the saxophone, I need to know the way to play each of the notes. And if I'm going to play the saxophone well, I need to have some level of judgment and taste about how I play it. Driving a car is a skill, but it relies on the knowledge of road signs and what the car controls do. And of course, the more you drive, the more you grow wisdom and hopefully make better and safer decisions about how you're going to drive. Now, I'm conscious this is a talk about software leadership, so I want to talk about how to apply that model to technology organizations. Just quickly, first of all, a quick reminder that Muscat is the capital of Oman. So when we talk about knowledge and technology, we're really thinking about things like APIs and syntax. Those are the kind of data, those are the facts that we have to use when writing software. Excuse me. Typically, we value that generally quite low. So you can search on Google or Stack Overflow or your internal Confluence for that knowledge rather than having to gain it yourself. But if you do want that knowledge for yourself or for your team, then you can do that through exposure, recall, and testing. So the repetition of knowledge helps cement it and is one way to bring knowledge into your abilities. That can come through videos, it can come through books, talks, documentation, and the outcome should be recognition and recall. And knowledge we can gain passively. So I would like you to answer this question out loud. I think most of you are probably sitting at home and there's no one nearby who can hear, so hopefully you'll feel comfortable with doing this. What is the capital city of Oman? I'm hoping that some of you said Muscat, and I'm hoping some of you that said Muscat didn't know that before this talk. That's something that you've learned purely passively. You haven't had to do anything other than sit here and listen to me talk and occasionally make slightly weird interjections into this talk, but you've learned a thing that you didn't know before and you've gained some knowledge. I said that we value knowledge quite lowly, but that's not to say it's not hard sometimes. So building a confluence is hard and slow. Creating that base of knowledge is hard work. However, searching it and reading it is generally fast and cheap, which is why we value having knowledge quite low down. Creating knowledge, on the other hand, is more valuable. When it comes to skills, those are the abilities and the how-tos of writing software and developing technology. We tend to value those in a very high regard. They're the main things we look for when we're hiring new people for our teams, and they're how we evaluate progression for the people on our teams already. The way that we gain skills is through trial and error with feedback. We gain skills by doing, not just through passive means. And that comes through on-the-job experience, or it can come through simulated experience as well, where we create realistic environments for people to do that trial and error with feedback in. The outcome of that should be not just knowledge of facts, but the ability to plan, create, review, to do new things in a new way that we couldn't before. So where knowledge is gained passively, skills, things like writing Golang, writing performant database queries, you learn by doing. I don't think most of us would get into a car that's been driven by someone who's learned to drive from books and videos without practical experience. And that's generally true of skills that you learn by doing, trial and error, and then having feedback to improve. Wisdom in software teams really comes out in things like design and architecture. So wisdom is something we value very highly when it's needed. It comes from the distillation of contextual experience. So wisdom comes from doing something multiple times in multiple ways or scenarios, and then having that reflection period where you think about what worked, what didn't, and the reasons why. And it's that contextual judgment that you gain from that we call wisdom. The way that you can get that is through repeated experience on the job, or through having simulated experience in context. So having people solve problems in 3 different scenarios and then talk about why each different way of solving the problem was right for the scenario is a way to gain that wisdom. And the outcome should be improved judgment. And this actually was the motivation behind calling our podcast primarily context-based, because those interesting questions that rely on wisdoms always have contextual answers. When there's not a single right answer to a question, we are reliant on wisdom and contextual judgment to know the right answer for the situation that we're in. So in a typical developer's day, they'll spend a lot of their time using skills. They'll occasionally be applying wisdom to help direct their skills in the right way. And they'll occasionally be searching the internet for knowledge that they haven't cached locally in their brains. What I like about this model is it explains my problem very well. I had wanted my team to gain skills, but the method I had used was purely passive, giving a talk. And so the best I could hope for them to get was knowledge, not ability. As you might imagine, I've spent a lot of time since then reflecting about training, experimenting with training methodology, and trying to put this model into application. And from that contextual experience, here's the wisdom that I think I've earned that I want to share. It's a set of principles for training and a system that's based on them. So firstly, you need to work out what you want from training. If what you want is knowledge, then you can gain that through passive means, through books and videos. If you want people to gain skills, then you need to do simulated experience in your training. You need to give people that chance to try and fail and try again for that skill to grow. And if you want people to gain wisdom, then you need to simulate experience in different contexts for that wisdom, for that contextual judgment to grow from what they've done. Certainly for me, I find that I mainly want to train people in skills and occasionally in wisdom, and that's always my focus when it comes to training. The second principle I would point you to is personalizing. You should make sure that you're only training topics that matter and are relevant, and which each person doesn't already know. And the reason for that is that there are 2 great enemies of effective learning: boredom and irrelevance. When people are bored, that comes easily by you telling them something they already know, and you want to avoid that at all costs, because it means that people will come to hate training. They will switch off and then they will learn nothing. On the other hand, if you teach people things that are irrelevant to them, then people will hate that too, because it seems pointless, and so they'll switch off and they will learn nothing. And that means you end up wasting time and money and getting no impact from what you've done. Instead, what you can do is personalize the training you offer through a granular assessment. When you talk about what training courses you're going to be sending people on, you are an intermediate does not count as granular. You know about generic functions but not generic classes is the right level of granularity, where you can select individual topics to train someone in and individual topics to avoid training them in. That way you can make sure that all the time spent training is both relevant and interesting, and therefore engaging, and therefore impactful and effective. The third principle is to focus and to teach one topic at a time. So learning should be hard mental work. Learning shouldn't feel easy. And distraction and dilution makes it harder. What focus enables then is effectiveness of learning. And focus on a single topic and avoid those distractions and avoid that dilution of the topic. Then you can let people explore the depth and the breadth of that topic with practice, with focus as well, which means they can really learn it. My next suggestion for you is to reduce cycle time. Now, we talk about cycle time in lots of other processes and in software development. The cycle in training is the cycle between the trainer teaching something and then the learner applying it, and specifically the application of what's being taught. So when we talk about cycle time here, it's the maximum time between teaching something and then the application of that thing. If you have a long cycle, then it's very hard for practice to be fresh and relevant. If you have a short cycle, not only will the practice be fresh, but it will also enable focus, because the thing that's being applied and that's being experimented with by the learner is the thing that they've just heard about. So if you're reliant on learning by pairing, then it could easily be a month between a developer seeing something during a pairing session and then coming to do it themselves in their code base. If you structure your training as 7 hours of videos or slides followed by a 1 hour of project, then your cycle time will be 7 hours, which is obviously a lot better than a month. But if you build training that's iterative, where you build in the complexity with practical exercises at each stage, then you can get that cycle time down below 10 minutes, which might sound surprising, but it really can be done. And what it results in is a much more effective form of learning. Principle number 5 is to challenge and support. So to set genuinely hard problems, but then help people to solve them. And that's because skills and wisdom both come from trial and error. The harder the challenge, the harder the trial, the stronger the skill that you will get out of it. On the other hand, if you offer no exercises, then there's no possibility of failure, and therefore there's no skill learning involved. If you offer exercises, but the exercises can be solved by copying and pasting content from your slides or from your book or from the notes that come with your video, then there'll be some learning, but it's minimized because there's not been any real trial. It's just, which of the 3 things on the page do I need to copy and paste to get past this exercise? Instead, you want to be challenging people and enabling the difficult questions to happen during learning when the trainer is there. Because good training leaves people capable. They leave the session able to do something new, where bad training tells people about something new and then lets them be challenged for the first time outside of the session when they're on their own, when they're writing production code, where you really want that to be the case when they're just putting into practice something that they already feel really comfortable with doing. So there's a potential to really miss the opportunity for learning if you don't set hard challenges and then help people through them. The last principle is to spread it out. So learning should be hard. Learning should be hard, it should require focus, and that means it needs to have breathing room. You need to give people a chance to apply what's been learned. If you load on too much training at once, then there is no chance for skills to be cemented before you add to them. And it's the same, it's that focus point again, in a way, that people need a chance to really do something and then to explore it and implement it before you try and teach them something new. So instead, try aiming for an hour of training at a time, spaced out so that people have the opportunity to really focus for that hour and then apply and come back ready to learn something new in the future. So just to briefly summarize that, training should be personalized. It should be related to what people need to know and what is going to be worthwhile for them to know for their work. It should be hands-on because skills are learned by doing and by trial and error and failure. And it should be expert-led because people need challenges in training if they're going to come out with real capabilities. Otherwise, the challenge happens outside of training, and the training has kind of missed a trick and missed an opportunity to be effective. And lastly, try and get your training sessions down to 1 hour at a time if you can. because what that will enable is practice in between, and for those skills to be really cemented before you build on them. This is certainly the most effective way I found to learn new skills. We actually built the company around this idea because this is how we train at Skill Well. We know it works and people like it, that our users give this way of training a score of 4.8 out of 5. Our customers tell us that for bringing skills into a team, it's 6 times cheaper than hiring and outsourcing. And you're very welcome to copy this methodology. It's hard, but absolutely not impossible to do this for yourself. So I'm Hal. I hope this has given some food for thought about how you approach training in the future. You're welcome to hit me up on Twitter, on the CTO Craft Slack, where I'm at H. I'm always very happy to talk more about training and learning. And thank you for your attention.